Okay, welcome to Tuesday. Thanks for everybody being here. We have Mr. Hash retired from the city of Longview, going to lead us in invocation today. It's nice to see him.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners. Father, we thank you for allowing us to conduct the business of government today. We ask that as we move forward today, that your compassion would be in our hearts, your wisdom would be in our heads, your words would be in our words. We again thank you for allowing us to conduct the business, and please dwell with us here today. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you. Those who want to join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. I'd entertain a motion for the minutes of September 29 to October 1st. Man, we're already in October. Wow.
So moved.
Motion to approve the minutes of September 29 to October 1st. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. Those in favor? Aye. Thank you. I'll run through consent agenda. First, I'll explain a little bit because I know we have a couple new gentlemen I asked to come over. We go through our business, and at the end of business, then we open it up to public comment, which I know you're here for. Okay. We'll make it real clear. Okay, consent agenda. We have two call for hearings. One to close out community development block grant for 2024 to 25, scheduled for November 4th, 2025 at 9:30 right here. Call right after that, public hearing and community block grant applications for 2025-26, scheduled November 4th, 2025 at 9:45 right here. Call for bids, revised county road project for the replacement of the Allender Road Bridge, scheduled for, call for bids is scheduled for November 10th, 2025 at 1:30. This is a pretty big project. The engineer's estimate is about 2.8 million, right in that range. And it comes with a federal grant of about 2.3 to pay for it, and the rest comes out of us. 4 through 12 are all supplemental agreements with agencies that we work with that Public Works work with throughout the year on various projects and various needs. We're extending those contracts on all of those through the end of December 31st, 2026. To give you a little perspective, Sean, you gave me this number. Was this for last year? For the last 3 years? Okay, the last 3 years that we've had agreements with all these groups, we've spent about 200,000 to contract for those services. So that's items 4 through 12. 13, contract execution with Glacier Environmental Services for the headquarters landfill gas collection and control system. That's the wells we talked about in a previous meeting. This is the contract for that. Total amount of 1.49 million. 2 of us are traveling over to the Washington State Association of Counties, the annual meeting this November, myself and Commissioner Farrell. And 16, a master services agreement and addendum with Just FOIA for a public records request management system. The total 3-year contract is $67,878. We've been trying to move away from the current system we do public records with. We've taken a pretty long look at this Just FOIA. They seem to be in conversations with other entities that have switched and used them. They've been more efficient. They're much more user friendly than, I forget the one we use now. And actually it's at a better cost. So we're just switching from one provider to another. Two resolutions, a resolution approving and ratifying interagency agreements with Washington State Department of Enterprise Services to provide single representative signature for Hall of Justice project. Resolution to declare an emergency and authorize an emergency contract with Advanced Excavating Specialists LLC to repair collapsed storm sewer on Sweet Birch Drive. We had a storm sewer that collapsed. It needs to be repaired before the rainy season comes in and causes us some bigger problems. So we approved an emergency resolution to get that done. And vouchers in the amount to this past week, $3,874,456.08. That's consent agenda. Questions, comments, anything on consent? I don't see anything online, so I'd entertain a motion.
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda. One last time, any comments, questions?
Comment is in regards to the Allender Road stuff.
Is your mic
Mic
on,
on.
Mike?
No, it's not. Testing 1, 2, 3. No, it's not.
Push the button right in the middle.
There we go.
Thank you.
This comment is in regards to the Allender Road thing. These fish passage, bridge, culverts, et cetera, are really a great thing to watch. You guys ever thought about just giving that part of the county to Lewis County?
Is that?
Because I'm
is that
assuming
pretty
you
close?
know where it is, don't you? Oh, yeah, it's like this far away.
Oh,
You got to go through Lewis County to get there. And that's an awful lot of money for a very insignificant piece of road, kind of like that very important thoroughfare Northwest Cowlitz County, Garlock Road, that we're still messing around with at millions of dollars. It doesn't matter whether it comes from a federal grant.
yeah.
If Commissioner Mortensen was still sitting over there, I'm sure he would remind you, be careful where you take the money from.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, man, there's a lot of money is getting wasted. And, yeah, I know you're not going to give that piece of the county to Lewis County, but it would certainly be better if it was their problem instead of ours.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
It would be,
Amen.
yeah. I don't
probably have
disagree,
to
I
pay him
don't
to take
disagree
it.
with Mike at all. You know? Any other questions? Okay, I see nothing online, so I'll call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Couple motion items, Public Works.
Good morning, Commissioner Sean Early, Public Works. Today, we have a contract execution with Pano AI for the Pano Rapid Detect wildfire detection system. So this is for the landfill as our kind of two-point approach. We've talked about this many times with the board. After a lot of red tape and going through the process, working with Weyerhaeuser, working with our prosecuting attorneys, working with the vendor themselves, we're trying to at final execution. This is for a 5-year agreement at $40,000 a year. This will serve the entire Silver Lake Valley for wildfire detection, as well as focusing on the landfill itself for any fire detection within the surrounding immediate area or areas outside that are not part of our current fill zone.
We can have those pop up once in a while, just the nature of landfills, and it's nice to get ahead. Since I've been here, I think fire department had to go out there at least once, maybe twice.
Yeah, we usually have a nighttime battery that'll flare up once or twice a year. We try to get ahead of those. We have talked about the approach of fire management up there. This is the large scale view. We also are working on that very micro view of a thermal system within the fill itself to kind of manage that process overall.
Okay. Any questions? Ron?
Good morning, Commissioners. Just a quick question. Detection is very good. What is the response plan? Who responds?
Great question. So this system would alarm to our local operators on the landfill if it's during daytime hours. It'll also alarm directly to 911 and other emergency providers. They'll have full access to the system, and depending on the zone, it'd be the appropriate response for that. I don't know if Savannah has any additional on that.
Good morning, Savannah Clement, Public Services. So when trying to, I say, deal with landfill fires, we're trying to take a three-prong approach of prevention, detection, and response. So thank you for that question. It ties into exactly what we're trying to do. We work with Fire District 6 on our landfill response. That's the district that goes to the headquarters landfill. And we have had them out a couple times over the last few years. But as far as the response and addressing the fire, Sean's correct. The system itself has an alarm mechanism that will notify not only staff but dispatch as well, so that the authorities are alerted. If it's landfill fires seem to happen a lot when it's 3 a.m. and not during the day when we're all on site. So that is another piece of it that'll be able to provide 24/7 monitoring and dispatch and alert. So sorry, that was a long-winded response.
So do you have, I believe you have a fire truck station right there at the landfill, is that right?
We have a very large water truck. And it's specialized because of the nature of this, the landfill itself. You're driving on garbage. It's a more built like a, with dozer wheels, and so it's a little bit different than a fire truck, but, and it has some specialized nozzles to be able to shoot farther distances, so that we don't have to be right up against a fire. And that's to assist the fire district.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
So that 3 o'clock in the morning alarm, what's the response time before somebody's on site?
I guess I can't answer the response time exactly because it's just, it's a fire, it would be the Fire 6 response time from their location near Gassman Road to the headquarters landfill. So it could be anywhere between, 15 minutes to 20 minutes. I mean, just depends on, I guess, time of day. And so 3 a.m., I would say 20 minutes.
We're just looking for an estimate, not a
Sorry,
second
yeah.
stopwatch here.
No, next time we'll have a stopwatch. No.
Okay.
1 minute, 32 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions on that? Okay, seeing none, we'll call for a vote. Those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gina?
Hey, good morning, Gina James, Health and Human Services. Contract we have on the agenda today is with Employers Overload. They provide developmental disability employment and day services. The board approved last week our contract with the state for these services, as well as a couple of the other pass-through contracts. So this is one more of our pass-through contracts with a provider. And I think I mentioned we'll have one more with Goodwill next meeting likely. So this one is a reimbursement of up to $67,000 for the year.
Any questions on that? We went over that stuff pretty extensively last week. Okay, seeing none,
I move approval of the contract with Employers Overload.
okay, we have a motion to approve the contract with Employers Overload. Last call. Okay.
Hello.
I know I'm a layman, and I don't know all the terms, the totals and monies from different figures that you're coming from. However, it just seems to me that 67,000 isn't quite enough if we want to help our homeless task force, because these people, they need more help. And the prices are, it's more costly to transport these people as well.
Yeah. So this particular contract is for a really specific service. It's
I see.
for employment and day programs for individuals with developmental disabilities in the community. And the funding allocation is based on the individuals that they're serving.
Oh, okay. Well, it just seemed like a low number. Thank you.
We have, how many providers will we have when we're done? We'll have like five.
Yes.
Five. So it's, and I think LifeWorks is probably the biggest part of that flow, and they're about 1.5 million. I mean, there's other monies out there. This isn't the only place that can help.
Mhm.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Gina.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
19, did we make a motion? I know we voted on it, but
I didn't hear
I don't think we made a motion. Did
Oh, sorry.
that a technicality problem?
Yeah, that's a technicality problem.
Back up here and say.
Should have slapped me earlier.
I move approval of contract execution with.
Your mic's not on, Steve. Your mic's not on.
Or the mic's not on naturally. I move approval of the contract execution with Pano AI.
Okay. I neglected to get a motion on 19. Commissioner Farrell corrected me. Thank you for that. So we have officially we have a motion. So any other comments? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. Those in favor? Aye. Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate that. I earned this white hair for a reason, I guess. Okay, before I open up to public, just at 10 o'clock today, we do have a workshop, Lower Columbia Fish Recovery Board. Last time we had fish recovery people in, it was very interesting. So if you have any interest in that, I think you'll find it interesting. Not next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, we have no meetings. Two of us are going to be out, and so there'll be no meetings next Tuesday. So if anybody sees the Larry in the red hat, remind him. Last time he showed up, so no meetings next Tuesday. But the following Tuesday, we'll be back to business, and we have Department of Ecology in at 10 a.m. And Gina will be going over the local homeless housing plan at 11 a.m. and that's on the 21st. Okay, with that, we'll open it up to the public, whatever you have.
My name's Brad Dutz. I'm a homeowner, taxpayer, landowner off of where Walker Road hits wildlife. We have this ongoing problem. 3 years now, we have a resident named Devin Grotz here who's piled thousands and hundreds of wooden pallets, garbage, cars, boats, massive amount, at least 700 feet, right within inches of the roadway on Walker Road, which is, we know is a private road, and we've been told this. But there's over 64 houses. All of us have to drive past this because all the streets are dead end. We've gone to the fire, we've gone to the sheriff, we've gone to environmental health, we've gone to building and planning, we've gone to nuisance abatement. I've gone to Senator Jeff Wilson, you, Rick Dahl, noxious weeds. I myself studied with Master Gardener's program. And what we have here is a massive environmental safety hazard, not only traffic safety, but pedestrians walk by, this junk is piled not only on the line of the road, but within inches. I mean, the biggest space probably between the line on the road is 4 to 5 inches, and he's got over 6 to 8 feet of things piled over 700-foot length. So August 27th, our good neighbor Dale Slanger brought a case to the Cowlitz Court, and the judge told Mr. Grotzer that he has 30 days to move all this stuff. That's over 40 days ago now, or 38 days ago. And we've got nothing. We've basically got Mr. Grosser piling more stuff and creating more of a hazard than it was even 40 days ago, August 27th, when the judge made the ruling. So we just would really, hoping to get you guys to help us ask the fire, the sheriff, the environmental health to do something, because we have a major, I look at it as major danger. We were talking fire earlier. If you have over 3,000 pallets piled, we were lucky in the summer that it didn't catch on fire. I believe the lawsuit that Mr. Slanger brought was because he moves large trucks down Walker Road for his business, a heavy hauling, and there's not, if you see the mess, and I'd be glad to bring in pictures at another meeting. We all have many, many pictures we've documented this mess with. You can't get two large vehicles passed at the same time. So tomorrow's a garbage truck, and in case something would happen when there's a garbage truck coming, you wouldn't be able to pass. There's all kinds of incidents that have happened. I tried to get more neighbors here today. I do have my neighbor John with me. And there's 64 residents that all have to pass this road, this Walker Road. And so we were really happy that the judge in August said, okay, you have to move this. And now here it is beyond 35, 36 days. It's worse. I can tell you there's at least 2 cars buried, 1 camper, 1 boat, 1 antique tractor, washing machines, propane tanks. We all have many photos, and I didn't bring them here, but I'm happy to come back any other Tuesday. And I want to bring more residents too, because we're appealing, we're begging. I feel like nothing has happened. Mr. Dahl, I've talked to 3 times on the phone, Senator Wilson 3 times. Apparently there is a Deputy Gladson who's working on it. I tried to get to the sheriff. I haven't been able to talk to the sheriff yet, but we had, it's just an emergency situation in my opinion. Just as a master gardener in the class, you can't even, you're not ever supposed to move wood more than a mile. He's bringing hundreds and hundreds of pallets into this gorgeous forest that we live. And there's invasive species. There's all kinds of things environmentally that not just the safety hazard. And we've had other neighbors with flat tires because in the rain things will fall. I've even stopped in the rain and picked up stuff and moved it off the road. So I'm asking, please, you as commissioners, help us as over 65 residents paying taxes, property taxes in Cowlitz County. Help us clean up this dangerous mess. Anything, John, so anything else? Any questions for me? I'd really like to see Cowlitz County help us as residents in trouble. Anything you guys could suggest, or could you tell me what you can do to help?
I got some information on it this morning. I asked if they would look into the case and kind of tell me what it was about and stuff. And by the way, I've driven by, and they're not exaggerating. We've had these type of things before, and I always like to go by them because sometimes the story's different than what you actually see. That's not the case here.
Okay.
It's if you drove up by it, it's a mess, and I don't know why neighbors do that to other neighbors. And I'll kind of relate to you what I got today, and it's tough because we're dealing with a private road, and a private road is not owned by the county. It's basically it's your guys' road. So I had the case looked at, and he said, noteworthy, the complaint was based upon real property dispute when he went to court. It was based on a real property dispute involving encroachment onto an easement in violation of terms of a real estate contract, because through your contract, you have access to that road, so it's being looked at as like you're infringing on your neighbor's property type thing, okay? There's no nuisance basis for the filing of the injunction. This was a civil property dispute between neighbors. Latest court filings show the landowner appeared but did never answered, and an order of default was entered on 9/24. So he defaulted. He's told what to do or whatever he was told. He defaulted on 9/24, and I anticipate final judgment will be forthcoming. So I don't think the court's done, and what they'll direct to be done, I don't know that, but as you speak, we've spoken 3 times and I've
Yeah.
looked at it, and I'm not disagreeing with you
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
I would love for them to be good neighbors and just get it out of there.
Yeah,
The private road issue makes it a little bit different how we tackle it. If it was a public road, then we have better ability to do that. But sometimes when you're in a civil thing, I hate to say this, but it can take a while. If you go back in history, remember the guy with the tires?
Oh, God,
Remember how long that took to resolve? It's,
Joe Cox.
I've only been here 5 years.
yeah.
And this has been going about 2.5 to 3
Yeah.
years. So,
I know what we continue to do. I do know that environmental continues to monitor and works on progress, and they're saying he is getting a few of the things out of there that they consider environmental stuff. Probably not fast enough to any of our liking, but I know they're continuing to look at that, and I think it's good that the sheriff is looking at it and
Okay.
and fire.
I have contacted the state EPA. I'm trying to get the state to push the county because as residents, we drive by daily
Yeah,
and we see it in not only increasing, but with a tractor, 3 vehicles, a camping truck, a boat, I know you have leakage and with thousands of pallets, I know you have the chance of really hurting the great forest we have around here.
well, and not to mention what starts living in the
Yeah.
pallets and
It's
stuff.
just,
Like I said, I'm totally not disagreeing with you. When I first heard about it, I went and drove by it and I went, wow, this is,
yeah, and as a property owner and resident, we're not trying to tell Mr. Grotzer, but this stuff shouldn't be on the road. Just put it back into your property behind your fence.
yeah.
But he's not only on the line of the road within inches. So again, 2 large vehicles cannot pass. So, and it's, I got it, it's a private road, but we're all county residents, and I believe, I'm not threatening, I believe Cowlitz County could face a severe lawsuit because we've got a lot of documentation now of talking to this county. I listed 6, 7 departments. If something happens, forest fire, wreck, fatal wreck, I mean, there's mothers that walk grade school kids down Walker Road to the intersection of Walker and Carroll because the bus doesn't come down Walker Road because it's a private road. Okay. The bus comes to Carroll. There's parents who are unable to, maybe don't have 2 cars. I've seen every morning a lady with little grade school kids walking to that corner, and man, folks, as soon as one of those children gets hurt because of the mess that won't allow cars by, the county's in trouble, okay? So please, I'll be back with more neighbors too, because I was the only neighbor with John who could, unless Gomez, I almost had the Gomez's here, but I'll bring back more neighbors, and I'll be happy to bring photos too, because we got danger.
Yeah, I talked to Mr., we chatted yesterday, and I suggested they participate in these meetings, so we all
Great.
know. I know that we'll continue to watch it. I know there's some limits on us, but we appreciate you coming by, and I continue to come by.
Well, thanks for calling. We really appreciate you inviting me, so hopefully it'll get better.
I have a question for you, sir.
Oh, yes.
Has anybody spoken to him as to why he's doing that?
When you talk to him, it's kind of difficult. If you were when you watched when we were watching the judge talk to him, she would directly ask him questions, and there'd be stumbling and very difficult, I think there's a mental issues, personally. You can hardly ask him a direct question and get a response. And so I've tried and I can't get a response. And also the 3 years, I believe there's some mental problem. I mean, I'm not official, but he just keeps stacking and stacking and it doesn't go away. And after the ruling in August, it's gotten worse. And again, there's 3 vehicles buried and I'd love for you to see it. I'll bring pictures in 2 weeks when you're back. And can we bring pictures? Can we pass an iPad around, or how do we, or I can email you, Rick? I'd love to
Yeah.
email photos
You can,
because
you can email them.
can I get an email? I would love to email photos.
I'd email it to Kelly and she can give you the deal, and then
Maybe you
Kelly
can
works
give
with
me an
all 3
email.
of us. Yeah.
Okay. So can you give me an email? Yeah. Pencil? Cards are in the office. Okay, well, thanks. Any other questions? I'd be happy to help any way I can because I feel there's a huge safety issue here.
But I guess I just want to make sure I understand. It sounds like the judge ruled on the basis of easement rights on a private road, correct?
Correct.
So there was no citation of a violation of county code.
I wouldn't know that. We were watching on the Zoom meeting. She said, sir, you have 30 days to clean it up.
Yeah. I-
So,
I know that we have, environmental is issued an order to get rid of what we considered this stuff. I don't know if it's gotten to a point of a citation yet.
yes, Mary Canali from the Environmental Health, I know issued fines, right? And I don't know if they've been paid. So I know I was told by her there's fines been issued. So
Okay.
I believe the yes is that way, the answer to your question. Anything else I can do? I'll be glad to help. I'll bring in photos in 2 weeks
Okay.
Okay,
and more
thank you.
neighbors. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Anything else for today? Anybody else have anything? Mike, you got something?
As you should have guessed by now, roads are one of my favorite topics.
Yeah.
And when I listened to the previous speaker talk, I'm thinking, don't tell me we've got a substandard county road there. I am so thankful it's a private road.
Yeah.
But with that being said, with 64 houses on that road, that has to have a 60-foot wide easement. And if you can't get a garbage truck and a car past there, you got a serious problem with the road, other than the guy that's encroaching a few inches over the line. I haven't been on Walker Road for 25 years, but I think it's
Yeah.
wide enough it would work. Like I said, I haven't been there forever and a day. But I mean, it has to be a minimum of 60-foot easement in order to have more than 3 houses on it. So their road should be plenty wide enough. Maybe the HOA or whatever they've got up there needs to make the road a little better on the other side, or use their complete 60 feet. And I'm glad you did the research to find out, because like if this is a civil matter, which is what it sounds like, there's nothing that Board of Commissioners can do that I can see. I mean, there might be, but as a tax-paying citizen, I don't know what you can do to help alleviate the problem. But I mean, at least it's not a substandard county road, and I'm really glad to hear that.
We
Thank
can
you
always
very
be a
much.
voice. They've actually, when you go up there, I don't know how long it is, but they've actually paved it for quite a while. It's actually pretty nice. I don't know if it's 60 feet.
Well, that's what,
I haven't
that's
done
what the
that.
right of way has to be. The
Yeah.
road doesn't have to be that big.
Yeah.
The last time I was up there, it was gravel.
Yeah.
There was no blacktop.
Well, they've paved it quite a ways, and then it turns to gravel, but they've actually, the neighborhood, they've all done a pretty good job with that road. And
Well, good.
this gentleman is kind of violating, I think, what they haven't.
If nothing else, he's violating the spirit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to get up and say thanks for funding the veterans stand down. Big event. I was surprised. I'd never been to one before, but
Yeah.
it was pretty huge. And, event center size, that was pretty good, and good use of our funds for helping veterans out.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to give a shout out to the people that put that on, and even our own election department was there, and I got a pair of socks from those guys, and pretty good socks.
Yeah, I went over on Friday. I have a gentleman I graduated from high school by the name of Peter Lamont, who works with veterans in apprenticeship programs, and he had a booth over there. So he
Yeah.
said, come over and visit for a while. And you're right, there was a lot of people there. It was good to see.
Yeah, so thanks for doing that part.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, we have a workshop coming up at 10. So we will adjourn this, but we'll reconvene for the workshop at 10 o'clock. And like I say, the Fish and Wildlife or the Fish Recovery Board is, it may be just me, but I thought it was very interesting. So we will adjourn. We'll fire up again at 10. Okay. 10 o'clock, we're here for a workshop. We have Fish Recovery Board with us today. And I don't know how many, we have 3 different microphones you can use. If that table works for you, fine, that's awesome. There'll be if the bright green light isn't on, there's a push button in the middle to turn it on. Okay.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about salmon and steelhead recovery. For the record, I'm Steve Manlow. I'm the director of the Lower Columbia Fish Recovery Board. And I have with me.
Hi, I'm Bryce Glasser. I am with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm the Southwest Washington Fish Program Manager.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So we'll be tag teaming a little bit as we kind of work through a PowerPoint here. So yeah, today we wanted just to kind of provide a brief overview of salmon recovery in the Lower Columbia region with a focus on Cowlitz County, kind of how are we doing on recovery, what's been accomplished out there, how we approach our work. Yeah, and we brought a little bit of information on kind of stats on the most recent viability update to give you a sense for how the different populations are doing, and we'll kind of work through that as well. Next slide. So I like to start these presentations with a little bit of a kind of where we've been perspective. And, you know, it's estimated that, you know, back in the 1850s, there was anywhere between like 11 and 17 million salmon and steelhead coming back to the Columbia Basin. And a lot of studies kind of point to that general range. Today, you know, we're in a different position. Historically, those, you know, salmon and steelhead supported tribes. More recently, rec and commercial fisheries, kind of the basis of the food chain. Now we're down to about, you know, 200 million fish, or I'm sorry, 2 million fish coming back to the basin each year, which is just a fraction of where we used to be. About 2/3 of those are from hatchery programs. A lot of those centered around mitigation for the effects of different hydro projects, you know, both in tributaries and in the main stem Columbia. So when you look at, you know, where we've been, we got a pretty deep hole that we're trying to dig out of when, you know, when you talk about salmon and steelhead recovery. Next slide. So by the late 1990s, you know, salmon and steelhead across pretty much the entire West Coast were listed under the Endangered Species Act. In the Columbia Basin alone, we have 13 listed stocks. And then when you look at the region, the Lower Columbia region, which is circled in red up there, we have 69 individual populations of salmon and steelhead that are listed under the Endangered Species Act. And with that comes a whole lot of constraints on fisheries and hatcheries and what you can do with your property and things like that. We have the highest number of listed populations in the state down here in the Lower Columbia. So we have a lot of work to do on recovery. Next slide. So the state of Washington, when those listings hit at the federal level, kind of took a different approach than what you see in general under the Endangered Species Act. Typically, the federal agencies will come in, prepare a recovery plan, hand that off, or it sits on a shelf, right? But leave it up to others to implement, and then, you know, they implement in the programs that they have some control over. In Washington, it was different. The legislature opted to take more of a local control approach to the listings. They passed the Salmon Recovery Act, RCW 7785. And what that did is it established what you see in the different colors on this graphic here, regional recovery organizations that were charged with preparing locally in a collaborative way these salmon and steelhead recovery plans. So far more of a, you know, grassroots approach than what you typically see when it comes to ESA listing. So the Lower Columbia Fish Recovery Board was the first board created under that RCW. I think it was Representative Pennington from down here did the footwork, working with the county commissioners, got that legislation through, created the board, and as a recovery organization, we're now charged with implementing the recovery plan that was put together for the Southwest Washington counties down here. So we oversee that, facilitate that, help with implementation. The other hat that we wear as an organization, you see the smaller black lines on this graphic, those are the state lead entity boundaries. So you have the Salmon Recovery Funding Board. You often hear people say SURF Board, and that's a grant-based program to do habitat restoration, fish passage projects, things like that. And the Lower Columbia Fish Recovery Board is the lead entity, so we manage the grant programs and solicit projects for funding down here in Southwest Washington, and then pass our recommendations up to the statewide level for SURF Board funding. So we wear two hats in a lot of parts of the state. They don't, those roles are separated, but we cover both of those roles in Southwest Washington. I think it's worked pretty good. Next slide. So who's the board? Well, we work for you all. So the composition of our board was actually set up in that RCW. So it consists of county commissioners and counselors from each of our Southwest Washington counties. Right now, Commissioner Rader is on our board. There are citizens from each of the counties that are appointed by the counselors and commissioners. And right now it's Robert Sudar for Cowlitz County. He's the citizen rep from Cowlitz County. And then you see the other folks here that, you know, cities, tribes, hydropower interests. Our chair right now is Todd Olson from Pacific Corp, but chairmanship kind of rotates, you know, over time on the board. So this is who the board is, and then we have a staff of 5. We're a pretty small organization. Steve West is with me here today. He and I and 3 others, and that's pretty much it, small organization. We also have a technical advisory committee. You see the composition of that, and these are folks that kind of help with project evaluation and ranking in the different grant programs, and so they're the technical arm of the board. They support the board. Next slide. So the recovery plan is what we call an all-age plan. So when you look at the reasons for salmon and steelhead declines, they are many. There's a lot of them. There's no single factor that led to the declines of salmon and steelhead. They vary across species, they vary across populations and geographically. So the all-age refers to, you know, habitat, harvest, hatchery management, hydropower impacts, and then predation, which is not a H, but it's a P, but it fits in there as well, right? Those are all the different factors that led to the decline, and you can have a discussion about any population, and it's probably a different mix of those factors. And I think that's important to understand. The recovery plan has actions under each one of those categories, and they kind of vary, right, depending on the importance of those different H's. So there's no silver bullet. I mean, we all hear when we're out on the riverbank or wherever we are, I fish, I know, you know, Bryce here fishes as well, that if we just did this or we just did that, you know, we're going to recover fish. It's pretty complicated, and you got to work on a lot of these different things to really move recovery forward. Next slide. So how are the fish doing? Back in 2023, we worked with Fish and Wildlife on kind of assessing how are the fish doing today compared to when they were listed back in 1998, 1999. And these are just the big take-home messages. What we found was that long-term trend in that first graph, okay, that appears to have been arrested, so we're not seeing population, or we're not seeing species go backwards. There are some individual populations that are struggling, but the species as a whole are either doing as well as they were or improving in most cases. 35% of the populations have greater viability now than at the time of ESA listing. So that's progress, right? 19 or almost 20% of the populations are already meeting what we call our delisting abundance targets. So those numeric targets that are kind of the minimum that you have to have so the populations are stable and not going to blink out, right? So about 20% of them are already at that level. And then you can see here, we've seen some species and runtime level improvements for the species listed. This has been updated recently. Next slide. So every 2 years, the state of Washington does what's called the State of the Salmon Report, and they take a fresh look at the numbers, the populations. They go back and kind of recalculate abundance over time. And the last one was in 2022, and this one is from 2024. And what we found compared to 2022, Lower Columbia River, Coho have bumped up one category from making progress to approaching goal, which is really good. Coho in general are probably showing some of the best progress right now. And Columbia River chum improved from not keeping pace to making progress. So again, when you look at kind of the Lower Columbia populations compared to all those others kind of in the middle and to the left, we're seeing some good progress down here. Next slide. So in Cowlitz County, we have 9 different subbasins. There are 17 in the region as a whole. There are 9 that either occur within or partially overlap in Cowlitz County. They support 41 individual ESA listed salmon and steelhead populations. This just kind of shows you the graphic layout of those watersheds where they occur. Next slide. And I'm not going to spend I can talk half a day on this, but I'll just kind of give you the take homes here. But happy to answer any questions on this chart. But some of the take homes in the Cowlitz River, that's what this slide represents. There's another one on the other watersheds in the county. We have 21 populations when you roll up across the Cowlitz, Tilton, Upper Cowlitz, Coweeman, Toutle. 13 of those, or 62%, have recent abundance estimates that are greater than at listing baseline. 7 of those populations, or 33%, have abundance estimates greater than the ESA minimum delisting abundance target. So even better news, about 1/3 of the populations are kind of at that viability level where we need them to be. Healthy harvestable is another story. We need to continue to grow those populations for more harvest opportunities, but from an ESA perspective, we're making some pretty good progress there. Next slide. And this one kind of picks up the other watersheds in the county: Mill, Abernathy, Germany, Kalama, and the Lewis. We have 17 populations in those watersheds. 47% of those have abundance estimates greater than at listing, and about 30% have abundance estimates greater than those minimum targets as well. So seeing some progress as well. We have some bottlenecks. There are some populations that aren't doing so well, like, False Chinook out in Mill, Abernathy, Germany are at a really low level, kind of on the edge. Steelhead are kind of at a moderate viability. But some of the Chinook populations, like in the Kalama, the Lewis, are doing pretty good, as are Coho. So some success stories, but some challenges as well. Next slide. There's a lot of information when it comes to the status and trends. I know this question has come up in other workshops. If you kind of want to see how the populations have been performing, we just threw up a couple of sources that you could look at for more detail on status and trends, historic abundance, and then kind of how the LCFRB prioritizes those populations for recovery work. And I'll pause there before I jump into habitat and see if there's any questions on kind of the viability stuff, or we could wait till the end, whatever your preference is there.
On the previous slide, the first category was, I can't remember, MAG.
Yes.
What is MAG?
That's the series of watersheds on the edge of the county, Mill, Abernathy, Germany.
Okay.
Yep, that's those watersheds, yeah. Okay, and I'll jump. a
Are you
little
guys
bit-
good
oh,
with any questions from the audience if we have any?
If we could hold them till the end.
Till the end,
that would be
sure, okay.
great. Yeah, because we
Yeah.
also have some slides that we're not going to cover in the presentation that we can pull up based on
Okay.
questions as well.
Okay,
Kind of
perfect.
through these.
Yeah.
Okay. So next slide. So we do a lot of habitat work as our role, you know, as a lead entity. And we just kind of want to give a sense for what has been done on the ground out there. And this is a roll up from what's called the State Salmon Recovery Portal. It's accessible by anybody. You can go on there and see what's been funded where, how much it costs, who's doing the work, where's the work taking place, what kind, all that stuff. And you'll see here a lot of the projects in green are the ones that we kind of manage ourselves. That's the surfboard funding program. And you can see some focal areas. You see more dots out there in Mill, Abernathy, Germany, quite a few up in the Toutle, and a bunch in the Cowieman as well. Those have been kind of focal watersheds for a lot of the habitat work that we've done. There's a ton of yellow dots on there. Those are projects that have been done through DNR's road maintenance and abandonment program, right? So road fixes, culvert upgrades, bridge upgrades, those sorts of things. A ton of work has been done under DNR's RMAP program, and we've seen some really good benefits for Steelhead and Coho because of that.
Do they include anything that private, like, to get my house, I go through easement through timber. When they did some up there, they had to replace a culvert on one of the
Yeah.
springs there. Would that be a yellow dot? Okay.
That would probably be a yellow dot, and those dots include work on industrial forest land, for example, small woodland owners as well. So it's not just state lands. That's, you know, anything managed under the forest practices, rules and regs would be under yellow there. Yeah. Next slide. And this slide just kind of gives you a sense of some of the metrics, right, of work that's been done in Cowlitz County. You know, when you look at habitat restoration, there's been about 30 miles total of stream that's been what we call treated, right? It could be large woody debris, it could be off-channel connections, that sort of thing. About 30 miles total. There's another 20 miles in the hopper, you know, projects that have been designed or planned. Riparian habitat, kind of a big one, those riparian buffers, been, you know, pushing 474 acres that have been restored, and then there's about another, you know, 680 planned on top of that. Off-channel floodplain reconnection, that's acres as well, about 25 acres. A lot of that work's been done in the Toutle, Mill, Abernathy, Germany, and the Cowieman. And then, you know, back to the Fish Passage culverts, about 266 miles have improved passage because of all these, you know, different local, state, federal programs when it comes to fish passage, with about 25 miles additional that are kind of funded and planned, ready to go. And I did bring a handout today, and folks are willing to, or, you know, go ahead and grab this. It includes kind of a summary of how much habitat is blocked, how much has been opened up. This is specific to the lower Cowlitz, but this handout's available for anybody who wants to grab it. Next slide. A lot of the work we do is informed by what we call the intensively monitored watershed effort. And this is a Northwest region thing, right? Where they're actually monitoring the fish response to habitat restoration. We always get the question, well, does it work, right? I mean, you did this habitat work, are the fish? Well, it's through these intensively monitored watershed programs where we're able to test that question, right? I mean, so you do the work, you monitor the fish, you have a good understanding of the baseline, you're monitoring adjacent watersheds, so you're able to see if there's a difference in the treatment watershed versus the untreated watershed. And these projects cover a lot of different habitat restoration types. In some cases, it's like floodplains up in, Puget Sound, or over in Idaho in the Lemhi watershed. It's like woody debris placement. And then the one down here is in Mill Abernathy, Germany. Abernathy's the treatment watershed. And the focus there has been on trying to reconnect the floodplain and add complexity to the channel. And it focuses on coho to see what kind of response we can get population scale from coho production. And what we've learned from that is, yes, you can move the dial. You can create increased fish performance and numbers, but you got to treat roughly 30% of the watershed, the anadromous stream miles. That's what was done in Abernathy Creek up in the headwaters. You got to do pretty aggressive treatments. So a lot of woody debris, a lot of riparian work, those sorts of things. Intensive and extensive is kind of what we call. So we're using what we've learned there and from the other IMW studies in the Northwest to kind of help guide where we go. We want to make sure that we're doing the things that are going to be the most effective, right, when you're putting public dollars on the ground. So we're learning from these different studies as we go. The other thing we're learning is it takes multiple life cycles, right? So you take an action, you might not see fish respond until those juveniles go out to the ocean, come back as adults, spawn, have more juveniles. You measure things in terms of fish life cycles when you're doing this kind of work. So when you think of it from that perspective, we haven't been doing this very long when you really think about it from a fish perspective. Next slide. We just partnered with the Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership on a region-wide barrier inventory and prioritization. This hasn't been done in Southwest Washington. This was the first time a comprehensive inventory is done, but it's basically going out, looking at all the known fish passage barriers, assessing them, figuring out, where they are in the different watersheds, to kind of help, with folks identifying where to go with funding to make sure we're correcting the highest priority barriers out there. This is on our website. If you want to take a look at it, you can kind of see what popped out of this evaluation and how many barriers that have been identified. Next slide. And the prioritization process also includes taking a look at, how much habitat do you have above a barrier? How much do you have below? What's the quality of that habitat? How important are those populations and impacted by that particular barrier? And all those things are kind of, wrapped up into some modeling to help us make sure that we're fixing the barriers with the most bang for the buck and in areas where you don't have like downstream barriers that are blocking fish. So why fix this if you don't do the one downstream first, right? So the prioritization has really kind of helped identify where we need to be working with counties and cities and DNR and others on correcting barriers out there. And that's a whole nother conversation, but we have some more backup slides if questions pop up about, what we look at in barrier prioritization, that sort of thing. Next slide. This is a tough one, predation. We hear a lot about this. We see it out on the river. We have problems. We know it with sea lions, increased numbers in the main stem, avian predation. We also have northern pike minnow, a native species, walleye, smallmouth, largemouth bass, and collectively, predation is a huge hit when it comes to recovery. At one point, I think the estimation was about 44% of the upriver spring Chinook above Bonneville Dam were being taken out by sea lions right there at the dam, right? Avian predation, think it's around 10 to 15% of our steelhead are hit by avian predation, things like Caspian terns and cormorants. Major problem, there has been a lot of work done in the last 10 years, changes to the Marine Mammal Protection Act. I think there've been over 500 animals removed, from the main stem down below Bonneville through that control program, which has saved it's estimated 50,000 salmon and steelhead per year have been saved. A lot more can be done, I'm not going to speak for the agencies, but I do know we as a group advocate for funding for that program to kind of expand it and keep it going. But it is funding limited. That's a bottom line. And that's another one we can speak a little bit more to afterwards if there are questions on that. And I'll stop there. I've been yakking at you and turn it over to Bryce to talk about like hatchery and harvest management.
Yeah, thanks. Go ahead to the next slide there. Steve asked me to join today to help talk a little bit about the hatchery and harvest management actions. So I've got just a few slides here I'll try to walk through, and again, we can address questions or talk about these issues in more detail at the end. So I think one of the things that I've wanted to start off with here is just a takeaway is that these two H's, hatchery and harvest, were some of the first to be addressed after ESA listings occurred. Some of the actions that we do for these, which I'll talk to in a minute, were things that could be implemented more quickly than habitat restoration actions and things like that. So the significant actions we've taken have been in place for over 2 decades. There aren't really a lot of big actions left to take. We're really kind of in an adaptive management phase and refining these actions as we move forward with trying to promote recovery of salmon and steelhead populations. Next slide. So the hatchery pros and cons. Hatcheries get a lot of discussion. Was trying to figure out how to capture this topic in one slide. It's probably something that we could have a whole session or 2 sessions on, but trying to capture this in just a slide. I'll hit some high level things for you to consider. So at the real root of it, the primary pro from hatchery programs is they provide fish for harvest. They provide recreational and commercial fishing opportunities by producing fish that people can catch. This provides significant economic benefit at multiple levels. A lot of the fish produced in the Lower Columbia, in this county, go clear up the coast of Washington into Alaska and Canada. So we have, international, federal, state, local economic benefit that come from fisheries in those areas. There's also significant societal benefit from these fisheries. People like to fish. It's an important value that our society holds, both recreational and commercial. A lot of history in the Lower Columbia for the commercial fishing industry. And it provides access to salmon as a food source, right? That's how people either catch their fish themselves or purchase it in a store or go to a restaurant. So hatchery programs are really important, and they provide a great benefit there. They can also help to build or sustain population abundance. Some examples of that include reintroduction programs. For example, here on the Cowlitz River with Tacoma Power's dams, when those dams were built, that cut off access to the upper watershed for salmon and steelhead for many years. Now with their most recent license, similar to what's happening on the Lewis River as well, above Pacificor's dams, we're working on reintroduction programs that utilize hatchery fish to be placed into that vacant habitat to reestablish natural reproducing populations in those areas that were cut off from anadromy. Conservation programs, many of our hatchery programs have kind of a dual benefit. They provide those fish for harvest, but they also can support natural populations. We use, I'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide as well, but we have programs we call integrated programs where we take natural origin You'll hear me say the word natural origin. That's really wild fish, fish that have spawned in nature into the hatchery program. We use some of those for brood stock to help integrate the population with genetics from the natural environment. Those can really help to support natural populations and reduce the risk that we sometimes see from more domesticated traditional hatchery programs where we just only use hatchery fish in our brood stocks. One of the cons of hatchery programs is that they can reduce natural population productivity, diversity, and abundance. It's critical that we manage and monitor our hatchery programs well so that we try to minimize those impacts. They can have impact through ecological risk. Those are things like competition for food, space, particularly at the juvenile stage, that can be a problem. Genetic risk through interbreeding with the natural populations, and fishery risk where we have, we're putting those hatchery fish out there to be caught. We're offering fisheries, they're commingled with natural fish, and so we're having an impact on natural fish when we're fishing. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about harvest impacts and harvest actions here on the next slide. So I think we're ready to go there.
Can I ask a quick question about your last
Sure.
comment there? I have a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that we say that the hatchery fish, the commingling of them with native fish causes an issue, primarily because where did we get the hatchery strain in the first place?
Yeah, so that's again, a complicated question that we could probably talk through. And there's a lot of information, a lot of research, a lot of different studies that show the pros and cons and challenges there. I think maybe the simplest way to think about it is, yes, in a lot of cases we are using, and ideally we're utilizing the genetic strains that were there in those rivers, and we've been propagating those. But just like in other, production where there's domestication that occurs. So over time, when you're continually propagating those fish in an artificial environment, you're selecting for, fish that are more apt to survive in a, hatchery setting where there's high densities, lots of food, things like that. When they then go and spawn in the natural environment, they may be less suited to find, appropriate habitat, the best places to spawn, select mates, to hide from predators, things like that. So it's not that they can't reproduce or don't create, fish that can return, but what can happen is if that domesticated genetic, kind of profile is propagated into nature, you can see a reduction in the overall productivity of the population. So in a lot of our, I'll talk about some of the hatchery and harvest actions here, but the real goal is to minimize the number of hatchery fish that are out there so that the natural environment is driving the genetics of the fish that spawn naturally. And then in the hatchery system, we mitigate those impacts. So if it gets flip-flopped and there's more hatchery fish out there than there are natural fish, we start to see the populations trend towards those more domesticated stocks.
So would that, I'm not calling it a theory, but would that rationale also coincide with, like you talked about, the ecological impact of them and competition within the fry?
Mm-hmm.
If there were, whatever, I think it was 17 million salmon in the rivers, there had to have been a lot of competition for food then. So how are we saying that the hatcheries are would be creating that issue when we're actually putting less salmon into the water than what we had previously when the populations were so robust?
So that a lot of the ecological, that's a great question. A lot of the ecological concerns come from the fact that a couple things to think about with hatcheries. When we raise fish in hatcheries, generally we raise them to larger sizes more quickly, and we're putting out fish in huge numbers and large pulses. And oftentimes those fish, because when we do those releases, they're entering that natural environment. They're larger size. They're in higher abundance. They can push out the natural fish or outcompete them for space or resources. There can be disease issues that they carry. We try to, we manage for that closely. So it's really has to do with the, the abundance and the pulses and the how we raise fish to maximize survival that then can have negative ecological impact with those natural fish that are rearing out there. So that, that's the concern, and that's what we try to manage for, so that we try to produce hatchery fish that outmigrate quickly, don't spend a lot of time in the freshwater environment, enter the ocean. And there's different techniques and that we use to try to minimize the number of fish that don't behave that way. So, yeah.
So is one of the programs that we use, so that makes total sense that we're introducing a 6-inch fry into nature as opposed to one that was, born and grew up to get to the point where it's 6 inches long. But with the salmon life cycle, the carcasses that die, or the carcasses that are in the river from the parents, and then that creates feed for the bugs and all the stuff that the fry are going to eat. Are we seeing, does that have an impact on it? Because if we're taking the fish out of the river and breeding them in the hatchery, that we're
Correct.
taking that element
Nutrient
of food,
source.
if you will, out of the river.
That's absolutely a concern. We try to utilize programs, and you'll probably heard about nutrient enhancement activities. So where we do remove hatchery fish, either at the hatchery or through other actions, which I'll talk about here in just a second, we can put those back out as carcasses into the system to help with that nutrient load. There's also analogs that have been tested and tried. Providing marine-derived nutrients is what they call it into the system is really important to drive that ecological benefit. So yes, that's a trade-off and a balance, right? And I think, in a perfect scenario, we'd like to have more natural spawning fish creating that nutrient pulse. Where we can't get that, we try to, put hatchery carcasses back out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I could add to that, the Lower Columbia Fisheries Enhancement Group, I think they may have presented before in different workshops. Morgan Morris is the director there. They have a really robust carcass placement program, right? And it's region-wide. They use volunteers, and they're hauling carcasses to a lot of watersheds in Southwest Washington. They work with the hatcheries. They have freezers. The fish respond stuffed in freezers, and these guys come along in trucks, and then they haul them up to the watershed and pitch them in the water. So it's been a long-standing program, a lot of volunteer hours there. But yeah, that's just one way of trying to keep that function going, right, as we're managing hatcheries.
So I never thought about it before, but do hatcheries only harvest hatchery fish? Is that true?
You mean in terms of their brood stock, what they pull into to spawn?
Yeah, what you're gonna use to raise hatchery fish, you never take a wild fish into the hatchery. Is
No,
that
that's
correct?
not correct. I'll let Bryce talk about that.
Yeah.
That's one of the points he's gonna talk about.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
maybe if we could flip to the next slide, I'll walk through a few of the hatchery actions and the harvest actions, and we can come back to that question, because I think
Okay.
I'll touch on that. So in terms of actions that we've taken to try to promote recovery, minimize impacts from hatchery and harvest, a big one we just talked about was program production size changes, right? Just how many fish are we releasing? Generally, we've seen a decline in the production sizes as we've been responding to the ESA listings to minimize those impacts that we've been discussing. Program types gets to your question, Commissioner, where we have basically two types of programs. One we call an integrated program. Sometimes those are referred to as wild broodstock programs. That's where we are taking purposefully natural spawning wild fish into the hatchery, either as the sole source or some proportion. A lot of times it's a proportion, 30%, 50% of the broodstock that will be brought in, and to try to bring that genetic exchange between the natural population and the hatchery population. That's what we call an integrated program. A segregated or an isolated program is more what you'd think of traditionally was done where it's just hatchery fish that return. You just use those. You exclude any wild fish from your brood stock. And those have different purposes, and we use them differently depending on the situation. So those are actions that we can take to try to minimize negative interactions with natural populations. The other one we talked about was removing hatchery fish from the spawning grounds. Our primary tool for doing that is harvest. We like, they're produced for harvest. We want to have recreational and commercial harvest remove those fish, the ones that don't get back to the hatchery. We have to make sure we get enough back to the hatchery to maintain our program. So sometimes we have to restrict fishing opportunities to be able to do that. We also use weirs. Those are river spanning weir structures that capture fish as they're returning, allows us to sort out hatchery fish and pass the naturally produced wild fish upstream. And then more recently, we've been investing a lot in seining, where we do beach seining in tributaries to capture, again, and sort fish. Another hatchery action that we've taken are fish culture improvements, upgrades to our infrastructure. That's a big one. A lot of our hatchery facilities were built in the 50s after Mitchell Act was implemented in the federal hydro system. So they're aging. So the improvements allow us to handle fish better, sort fish better, reduce disease, just improved fish culture overall. And the real benefit there is that the better survival you can get out of the fish that you produce, the more adults will get returning from the number of fish. So you can have fewer fish put out and still get the same number of adults back if you can improve their overall survival. So that's the benefit of fish culture improvement. Are you okay if I jump to the harvest actions, or did you want to go back to questions on hatcheries first?
Well, I do have a question about
Okay.
that, though.
Sure.
And I appreciate you being here and willing to field questions.
Sure.
I know it's not easy. How do we determine what a wild fish is, given the fact that hatcheries have been on these rivers for years? A wild fish technically could just be the spawn from a hatchery fish that spawned in the wild. That doesn't necessarily make it a wild fish, does it? I mean, because aren't we just propagating the same thing that you just described earlier about, we're continuing to propagate that genetic strain?
Mm-hmm.
I gotta think that fish don't discern, oh, that's a native mama that I'm gonna go breed with. That one's a hatchery mama I'm gonna go breed with. So when you take that wild brood stock, there's no assurance that it's not just spawned from the previous hatchery run, right? So what are we doing to offset that?
That's a good question. Again, I'm smiling because in some of our past work group discussions, we probably spent hours and hours discussing this topic with folks. So I'll see if I can boil it down to a couple things. I think there's some terminology differences that are thrown out there. You'll hear the word native, you'll hear the word wild, you'll hear the word natural origin. So what we generally refer to as natural origin or wild fish are fish that are produced naturally, spawning in nature. And yes, those could be progeny from two hatchery pair, like we talked about. We're using hatchery fish in the Upper Cowlitz to reintroduce. When we talk about native stocks, those are generally the ones, the genetic legacy of the fish that were there historically, knowing that over time through hatchery practices, there's been influence from hatchery programs. In the past, we used to bring in hatchery stocks from other places in the state, and that's intermingled with our genetics. So pure native stocks that were there, hundreds of years ago probably don't exist in many places. But what we're really trying to do is in these natural or wild populations is allow the natural environment to apply natural selection pressure. Force adaptation selection is pretty, fish that are, an example would be, if hatchery fish return early and spawn naturally, and it's a warm year and rivers are low, their survival is going to be lower. Those that come in later are probably going to have higher survival. So nature selects genetically pretty quickly which fish are going to do well in the natural environment. So even though they may have hatchery lineage in their genetics, what we're trying to do is let the natural environment drive their adaptation and not let the continued domestication in a hatchery overwhelm that. Does that help? Kind of?
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
There's a lot of shades of gray is
Yeah.
how I look at it, and there's probably no, no stock out there that hasn't been heavily influenced by prior management, but what we're trying to push for and manage for are fish that are adapted to the local watershed and that do well. And if that's a hatchery fish that comes back and reproduces and we have progeny from that, and those fish are adapting to that watershed, right? A lot of times they're not because they're from other basins and that sort of thing. But it's those fish that come back and are able to spawn and adapt to those local conditions. That's kind of what we're looking at from a sustainability standpoint, trying to rebuild those fish that are successful. It's just we've had so much mixing and matching historically over the last 150 years. Hatcheries have been around a long time, but we still have watersheds where fish are coming into Washington tributaries from Oregon hatchery programs, and they're not contributing much to rebuilding populations, right? But they're intermixing with the small handful of natural origin fish that are there. So they're trying to manage those sorts of impacts, right? But lots of shades of gray is kind of how I look at it.
Two quick questions.
Yep.
One is the integrated wild brood stock. Do you mark those as hatchery fish when they go out?
In most cases, yes. Again, it depends if the purpose is a dual purpose for harvest and conservation, or so in most cases we do. We have a few programs where we don't.
So-
Locally in the Lower Columbia, Upper Columbia, as you move further up, where there's more tribal production, their tribal programs mark their fish differently. But there was a big push in the Lower Columbia, in most of our Washington facilities, to all hatchery fish are marked in some way. So even the ones that we don't maybe clip visually so that they're, adipose clip, which is I was going to talk about here in our next section, we do mark those somehow with like a coat-of-wire tag or something that allows us to distinguish them when they return. They just might not be visibly distinguishable to an angler, but the vast majority of our programs are adipose clipped.
So the returning fish, you can tell the difference between the isolated and the wild brood stock?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's generally done through what they call mass marking, where they're clipping that adipose fin behind the dorsal fin.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So maybe I'll work through the harvest actions and I'll turn it back over to Steve here. So in terms of harvest, a lot of it, we just talked about mass marking of hatchery fish so that those are visibly identifiable. That allows us to implement what they call mark selective fisheries in a lot of locations. Those are fisheries where you're allowed to retain hatchery fish, but you have to release the natural fish or the unclipped fish. So that's one way that we, in some places, can minimize impacts on those natural populations. In terms of the commercial sector, there been a lot of effort put into evaluating alternative commercial gears. The kind of more traditional gear was gill nets. You hear a lot about gill nets. The newer gear types that have been tested are tangle nets, purse and beach seines, and pound nets. Those gear types allow for fish to be handled alive and sorted, and so you can release the natural origin fish more easily and retain the hatchery target fish. The other thing we're working on is improved assessment so we can manage fisheries better, so better improved forecasting tools so we know how many fish are coming back. Management strategy evaluations where we can understand what different sets of harvest rules are, what different fishery impacts are based on how we implement fisheries, and then improved monitoring through creel programs and creel models where we can figure out how best and most efficiently to evaluate what is being caught in the fisheries and get better estimates of how many fish are caught and what the impacts to wild fish are. And one tool we have that's in the works with Washington is electronic catch record card reporting, similar to Oregon, which we're hoping to roll out in the near future, which will allow for more real-time in-season information to come from our fisheries. So those are the primary hatchery and harvest actions. I think I'll let Steve take over again, and then we'll
Sure.
have time for more questions at the end.
Next slide. And I'll be real quick. This, just want to reiterate here, we're dealing with a 150-year legacy of management, some cases mismanagement, habitat issues, right? Those sorts of things. And, we've really only been at recovery in earnest, I would argue, for about 15 years, right? I mean, Bryce talked about right out of the blocks, there were a lot of hatchery and harvest changes, Habitat is slow because you take an action, you're planting trees, you're adding wood, you're trying to target a particular life stage, and it might be 5 years before those fish come back, to that improved habitat. And it might take a couple of generations, right, to really see the results of that. So I don't know. I just like to emphasize that, salmon recovery is a long-term proposition. We just kind of have to keep at it here. We're trying to dig out of a pretty big hole. And I'll stop there. The most important part of this is questions. I know we'll have some. So next slide, we can just go to questions. Yeah.
Guys, I have a couple points I want to point out, and these are things that I've observed in my short 9 months of, serving with you, Steve, and I think you do a great job, and I'm grateful that you're in the position that you're in. But one of the things that I took away from our board meeting last week is we really have two issues that I see that need to be addressed, and they're not within the capacity of you gentlemen to really solve it. It's more of, people like the three of us. But the first one is, you stated that it's all based on funding. In the state of Washington alone, fisheries generate $9 billion in sales in this state, which is something to the tune of $700 million to the general fund. One of the things that needs to happen is the money that is generated through taxes for fisheries needs to have its own fund so that it can be used specifically for fisheries. And we got to stop clawing for every penny that we get for this kind of stuff. In the state of Washington, obviously that's going to have to happen in Olympia, but to me, that is an issue. It's a problem because the money that is generated within the fisheries department, if you will, not all of that goes to the fisheries. It goes to who knows what else, to other social programs. That is an issue, as far as I'm concerned, that needs to be rectified. The other issue that I see that we have is, and you guys mentioned it a couple of times, the Indian tribes, Oregon, all the fisheries that go up and down the Canadian coast to Alaska, Alaska itself. There isn't a unified standard on how to address this issue. Oregon's doing one thing, the Indian tribes are doing another, we're doing another, Canada's doing another. And I mean, we could be offsetting the efforts that one or another is utilizing. And to me, it seems like we're just running in a circle from that standpoint. I see the science and everything that you guys presented, and I agree with it and I understand it. The part that I see that creates an issue is the legislative process that we have and how we're dealing with this. Like, how many fish that are spawned in Washington run up the Canadian coast to Alaska, and all the fisheries in between there that do not contribute to any of those fish that are being spawned in our hatcheries running up that river or running up that coast, right? So that's an issue. The same thing with Oregon. What are they contributing to our fisheries? So somehow I feel like we have to be able to come together in a unified, for lack of a better term, form to come to a conclusion on how we're going to make this work with everybody, because I can just see we can do as much as we want with our hatchery release program and our harvest program, but if once those fish hit Canadian waters, they do what they want, we're fighting an uphill battle as far as that's concerned. So somehow I feel like we have to be able to come together to unify or to standardize what our practice is. And I don't know how you do that, because the treaties are a sovereign nation. They're going to do what they want to do. Everybody is they're gonna do what they want to do, but somehow we have to recognize that that is probably not the most efficient and effective way to do what we're doing. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
I
think
think
that-
you nailed the issue that it is complicated and there's a lot of players, you know, between federal, international players, tribal players, different states. And there is a pretty well-organized, process to have discussions. But it does take time to move through those and there are, you know, there are federal laws and rules and international treaties that have to be negotiated. And so I think generally, people recognize the need to coordinate and, you know, manage fisheries in a way that they don't over harvest. How you get to that point and who's, you know, the really difficult part comes when, the further away you get from the tributary, the more complex it becomes because you have mixed stocks and you have some that are weak and some that are strong. And when you have strong stocks and people want to catch those and fish on them and you're impacting weak stocks, it gets challenging. The closer you get to the tributary, you're really only focused on that. It's easy for me as a tributary manager to say, you know, hey, this stock, we're not getting our fish back to hatchery. We're going to close that fishery down, or we're doing great. Let's open it up. When you get out in the ocean, that gets harder. So I definitely agree. I think that generally people are all moving in the right directions and there are good communications, but it is complicated by all the factors you described.
Yeah, and if you think back to that presentation that Dr. Hurst gave at our board meeting, right, with those concentric circles, right? You have a treaty between United States and Canada and agreements there. And then you have interstate agreements. And then you have, as you move down and into the rivers, you know, you have agreements between tribes, some of those that are based in, you know, a legal foundation across the states and different processes. It's about the most complicated thing you could ever wade into, right? But what I will say, and I would agree with Bryce, you know, we sit in some of those processes and we comment as we can. If we see a problem with our populations in the Lower Columbia, we jumped in last year. Folks, I think, are trying to make sure that we're managing those international fisheries, the ocean fisheries, in river, what goes to the tribes, what goes to, you know, non-tribal, rec, commercial, with conservation in mind. And in general, I would argue that when you look at the end result of all that fishery, complex fishery management, harvest is probably not a big bottleneck for most of our stocks down here, right? Steelhead, I don't think it's a big issue. Coho, when you roll all that up, you're probably at about what, 18-20% harvest rate, right? Chum, not a big deal for us down here. Our chum are probably hit at less than 5% harvest rate when you roll it up across the whole coast up there. Where our problem arrives is when we're trying to manage for recovery in the Lower Columbia for populations like Chinook, where we have some that are on the verge of blinking out and others that are healthy and harvestable. It's trying to shift the paradigm in those huge processes to address population scale issues that we're trying to wrestle with down here. It's a challenge. I mean, and we could do better, I think, on that. But as we learn more with the science about population scale impacts, I think we're getting better at you know, trying to prevent those train wreck situations that can happen at the population scale. So I think it's, you know, my take home would be harvest is not a huge bottleneck for most of our populations, right? A lot of changes have been made and those forums are set up with backstops for conservation to where we're not over harvesting, but we have some problem areas. That's kind of how I look at it.
And I think, you know, listening to the conversations that we had last week and into what you just said, I think it's important also to make sure that let's just take the treaties that we have in place. How long have those treaties been in place? You know?
1855?
Okay, so 1855. Has the science changed and have we gained new knowledge as to how this stuff works? And if we're still operating under those treaties based on what was set in 1855, we're probably not utilizing the best practices at that point. And so I think it would be good if we had the ability to go back and reassess those treaties and, hey, is this still meeting, you know, what the outcome that we want? And if not, we have to be able to say, hey, we need to readdress this type of a thing.
And I think where the treaties come in and the court cases that have spun off of those treaties, like, you know, what US v. Oregon Bolt decision up in Puget Sound and whatnot, they're about allocation. They're about making sure that those tribes that have depended on those stocks forever still get a fair share, right? When it comes to the science, I would probably argue that the tribes are right there with the other fishery managers, the co-managers, and we're all pretty much operating from the same playbook as we learn more about fisheries management and whatnot. The treaties are more about making sure that those fish get through buoy 10, the ocean, buoy 10, the lower river, that there are enough to meet those treaty needs for the tribes upriver, right? We don't have any treaty tribes below Bonneville, so we're kind of in a different situation down here. But it's an allocation thing versus, you know, managing based on science, which I think we're all on the same page there, trying to learn as we go, right? So I don't know, I just kind of separate those things a little bit in my own head. Good. I don't know if that's right, Bryce, but.
No,
Yeah.
That's a good answer.
Anything from the audience you want to take advantage? It's nice having them here. We appreciate them coming in. If you have a question for them, I'm sure they try and answer it for you.
So, thank you for the opportunity. What is your posture regarding the proposed Forest Practices Acts and the significant impact on the upper stream areas that are questionable fish bearing?
I'll take a crack at that. Do you mean in terms of the non-fish bearing rule that's kind of being kicked around right now? Is that what
Yeah,
you're
that
asking
is a
about?
very, very significant economic impact.
Yeah, yeah. We have not weighed in on that as a board, so I'm not going to speak on behalf of the board. What I will say is, in general, you know, we're looking for good water quality coming off of those timberlands, right? Water quality, temperature, that sort of thing. So, you know, in cases where you may have an impact from not buffering, like a big non-fish bearing water, that can be important, right? But yeah, I don't have a real good answer because that's not one we've been diving in on as a board. So I really can't speak much to that. Aside from, yeah, water quality, sediment, temperature, as long as we're managing those things off of, you know, industrial forest lands, state lands, then we're doing what the fish need out there. That said, you know, I'll be the first one to acknowledge the critical importance of forest land to recovery. The minute we start converting a whole lot of forest land to urban strip malls and that sort of thing, right? To me, that's a bigger issue right now. We got to keep the people who are doing, you know, making a living off the forests in forest practices, because I think that's a lot better for fish than what we see in like urbanizing areas, and we're losing those grounds. So, yeah.
Well, just a comment, the economic impact on the forest property owners is monumental. In fact, many of them are saying we can't afford to even be in the forest business anymore on doing this stuff. So, and the forest practices, if it's for fish benefit, then you sure as heck should weigh in on it. That's what we're being told. For fish, you're in the fish business, you should be weighing in on it heavily and giving your opinion. Secondly, the regulations would have some bearing on the purpose that you're trying to do. If you're trying to keep the waters cool and shading, then not all the rivers run in the same direction. There are shading on one side and the other side has no bearing whatsoever. So you would want some modifications that accommodate those things and show that you're really looking at the benefits and the impact and the economic impact. So I certainly request and would say you need to weigh in on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Secondly, is that management of the fish. You're talking about here to Lower Columbia, but we're also talking about the whole Columbia stream. And a lot of these are just going straight through your fish area here. But there are areas, and I'll just use as an example, the 155 miles of stream above Grand Coulee Dam. And of course, there's no fish coming up below Chief Joseph Dam and above Grand Coulee Dam. The Colville Indian Reservation is buying fish from Washington State Fisheries, planting them in Lake Roosevelt for 155 miles. I am hoping that that is managed as a fish entity in itself. Those fish are not going to go downriver and survive going through those dams, or very, very few of those are. And so if you're putting fish in there, they have the bunch of streams, upstream, Spokane River, and a whole bunch to develop their life cycle. But I don't know how that works. But anyway, that is a management in itself that is almost independent of the Columbia River.
Yeah.
Is that a fact or is not?
So I think it's a little bit outside of our area here, so I'm not fully up to speed. I know my counterparts in that region are heavily engaged with that issue, the reintroduction above the Chief Joe. And I think there is expectation that there will be some survival, or that juveniles will be able to get out at some level. That's the hope. You know, it's easier to get juvenile fish sometimes past dams than it is to get them above. So I don't think that the plan is that they would be managed as a landlocked population. I think there is expectation there would be connection to anadromy over time. But I can't speak to all the details there because I'm not involved in those discussions fully.
I know there's funding issues with that right now too. It was kind of caught up in that, what do you call it? Resilient Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative, right? So there was some funding that was going to head toward making that program work. And I think that's kind of been on the back burner now with the current administration. So I'm not too sure where that program is right now, funding wise.
Again, I'm just using that as an example. You have similar situations right here
Mhm.
on our
Yeah.
barrier dams there that the fish are not going up. You're taking fish upstream.
Right.
One is to manage fish that may retain in those reservoirs. Or are you presuming at all that if they don't come downstream, they're not important?
I think the goal in our local area here with the Cowlitz, for example, and Lewis systems is that there are requirements in their hydro licenses for Tacoma Power and Pacificor to meet collection efficiency standards, they call them, or fish passage survival standards, how many of the out migrating juveniles they need to collect and be able to move downstream. And those are pretty high standards. It's generally 95% or more. There are fish that, for steelhead example, there's a resident component, and so we do manage and are interested in the fish populations that exhibit freshwater residency, like for steelhead. But the goal in those systems is that they are working to get the smolts, the fish that want to come out at a very high rate. So that's the objective.
And there are collectors in both the Cowlitz at Cowlitz Falls, and then up at Swift Reservoir in Lewis, right? There are juvenile collectors. The challenge is getting those dialed in to where they're functioning really good, because we're not meeting targets yet in those systems. So that's the bottleneck to making that program work. It's collecting those juveniles that are coming out, and that's where things are struggling.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, Mr. Chair, we have time. A quick question. This may be more for Morgan than for you, but with the collection, the trap and haul that we've got going on the Toutle, that are going to be, trapping those fish, hauling them up above the SRS into the river. With that particular program, can you explain why we're doing that when we have the issues with the SRS that we're currently having? Army Corps is looking at raising it again. And we've got the problems that we've got with the tunnel at Spirit Lake. What's the future for those fish? Because if they can't get up, they're probably not going to be able to get down, especially with us putting in and raising the SRS. And we've got the sediment issues that we've got in the Cowlitz and that kind of stuff. To me, it just seems like that program, we would wait to be implemented until we got the issues resolved on the Tootle, and on the Cowlitz, to be introducing salmon into an area that we have to haul them up there because they can't get up there.
Want to touch that one?
Sure, I
Yeah,
can touch that.
yeah.
So we have been implemented, that truck and haul program has been implemented since the construction of the SRS. It was started in 1989, and since 1989, we've been trucking naturally produced coho and steelhead around the SRS and releasing them into some tributary release locations. And we do see production from those, so we know that juveniles are getting out, making their way out and coming back. The challenge is that we have very limited release locations right now in just a couple of tributaries. And so there's a lot of underutilized habitat up there that can be producing more fish. And so our goal, through some of the reintroduction program that we're implementing on the Upper Tootle, is to get additional release sites, particularly on the main stem, so that those fish can access more habitat, and also to start taking fall and spring Chinook up, which have not been transported. Those populations are at very low abundance, and so we're trying to reintroduce those populations. The Tootle Fish Collection Facility and the upgrade that's proposed for it is, in our view, an interim objective, while we, in a perfect world, would work towards volitional passage where fish could get up over that spillway on their own. So that's something we've been supportive of, is trying to work towards volitional passage. It doesn't mean we wouldn't use that collector in the future to handle fish or sort fish, but the idea would be, we could release fish back into the river, let them go on their way and not have to truck them, and let them kind of self-sort into the areas they want to go. So it's really, right now, it's an issue of, just because that area up there is been so affected by the eruption, it's difficult to find locations we can get trucks and get fish in to release them. So we've had limited areas to do that. So we're working to expand the number of release locations and the number of fish we're putting up there, and hopefully use a lot of habitat that's currently vacant. And we think we'll get a big response from that if we can make that happen.
Yeah, there's about 50 miles or so of pretty good habitat up there, right? I mean, a lot of the sediment issues are down below, but once you get above that sediment plane, above the SRS, about 50 miles of habitat. And, what we've learned from doing a lot of restoration work over the years, getting fish into existing functional habitat is a lot better than trying to enhance habitat and get that same boost, right? So if you got blocked habitat and you can get fish into that, and we got a lot of examples of that, a lot from Cowlitz County. I got a couple of slides on those too, where that's the best way to get the bang for the buck in terms of population response.
So how much input do we have with the Corps, with them, with the raise of that new structure with regards to the volitional patches like you talked about? Do we have a say in that with the design and the building of that new structure?
We collectively have chimed in at every opportunity since the board was created, right? I mean, my predecessor, Jeff Breckel, some of you probably know him, wrote letters to the colonel, on that, when I took over for Jeff. Every opportunity that came around through the, environmental review process, we're advocating for that. The Corps is a tough one to move, right? And unless Congress appropriates funding, they're only going to do what they're funded to do. You guys have heard that in other discussions we've, in this room. To me, the ticket is working with our congressionals on a funding package that includes volitional passage to where, if the Corps has the funding, and Congress tells them to do it, they will do it. That's just how they operate. I worked for the Corps for 6 years. I know how that operates. So to me, it's a congressional thing, working together on funding for that program.
Interesting. Mike, were you just stretching, or did you have something you wanted to ask? Okay. Okay.
First question is, was this on KVL TV, this workshop?
I haven't seen them on there.
Okay, second question was, is this PowerPoint available? Like if I was to come to the office, I could get this PowerPoint?
I could, yeah, we can get it to you.
I'm not a
Yeah.
download guy, so let's not do that. And it was a very good presentation. I'm really glad that I decided to stumble into the county commissioner meeting today and then stick around for this. It's a very good thing. Now I'll start my comments. This has been kicked around forever and a day, and you, the bureaucrats, you, the politicians, and we, the people, all need to be honest in this discussion. And as you people said, there's a lot of gray in this, and that gray gets really easy to get things off a top dead center, which is where this has to be. Some of the questions that Commissioner Rader asked, those are very good questions. I didn't particularly like the answers. I don't know what you thought about the answers you got. In today's daily news, Washington State University is lamenting their low enrollment. If I hadn't been so lazy and would have filled out a few papers, I could have had a minor in genetics when I was attending that. Now I think I'll re-enroll in the global WSU, not have to go back to Pullman, and pick up my degree in genetics so we could talk about this natural, wild hatchery fish thing. I would ask the bureaucrats, does Michael Hogan, does that name ring a bell for you people?
Hogan.
Federal judge in Eugene?
Oh, yeah, yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
His niece is a good friend of mine, so therefore his sister is a good friend of mine. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to skew whatever the truth may or may not be. And like you talk about the interplay with other brood stocks come in, you know what? Take your red chart at the, what was that, slide number 2? The amount of fish that were there 150 years ago versus were there in what? They like to use 1938 and the Bonneville Dam as his point, and where it's come to today. And the marine mammals, and that doesn't stop with the seals and sea lions that will go to the great big ones that eat lots of fish. I mean, there's a multitude of problems. Unless everybody wants to be brutally honest about this, we are never going to get there. And I'll be brutally honest about the stream thing. I drove to Olympia to testify on that stream thing only because I couldn't go to Port Angeles and I wanted to do that, but I had too many things that I couldn't let go. And I'm going to sit here and say when the forestry people say, oh, we can't afford to be in the timber industry. What on earth are you going to do with that stream beds? You're not going to turn it into a strip mall. You're not going to turn it into cow pasture, and you're not going to build houses on it. Timberland is the least common denominator in all these things. And if the timber people don't want to say that, you're not going to be honest and get anywhere going down that road. And I drove to Olympia only because I didn't know there was an opportunity to testify here in Longview. But you're not going to take that timberland out of timberland because it's not suitable for anything else. End of that discussion. Now, I completely concur with what Ron said about the creek running this direction, shade on one side, never sees the sun on the other. Maybe you take that 57-foot or 118-foot buffer. Instead of having 118 feet on both sides, maybe we go 130 or 140 on one side and let this other one go. You're going to have enough food for the bugs and the birds in this strip of timber here, yet you'll be able to recover the economic value to a landowner on that other side, whether it's a big industrial timber owner, and I think you refer to us little people even as industrial timber owners because we do market the timber. Luckily for me, all of our little draws like that have been previously logged in the last 20 or 30 years, and I won't live long enough to have to worry about it. But everybody has to be honest or we can't move forward. You keep saying, well, he said, she said, we said. That don't get us anywhere. And I know it's not you guys' fault, and it's not your place as an employee of whatever agency you work for, testify on that position. Now, if you want to testify on that situation as a private citizen, as we the people, you are more than welcome and encouraged to do so. But as an employee of some form of the government, that's not your place. There's people get way better pay grade than you are responsible for that. And hey, like I said, I'm really glad I came and stayed and watched this thing today because it's very informative. I went to one once when Jeff was still around, probably 20 years ago, and it was pretty much fall asleep. This was a very good PowerPoint you had, and I thank you for putting it together, and I will get a hold of you and try to figure out how to get that thing downloaded because there's a lot of good information there that everybody can use. Thank you.
We have some backup slides we don't have time to get to today, but you might find those informative too. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, you guys. Really appreciate that. I'm just gonna say this as my experience with fish around here. I grew up here, lived here most of my life, but I can remember leaving here to go into the Army. And when I left here to fish there was just lots of fish. I mean, like where I mainly hung around was the Clam River and it was packed every year, all kinds of fish. Came back from the army just a short few years later, and all of a sudden there's no fish. But gosh darn, the bank is lined with fishermen all of a sudden, you know? So all I'm gonna say is we got too many people here. I think Steve and I are the only guys that are actually from here. So the rest of y'all get out of here and we can get our fish back, right, Steve?
I love these workshops and I so appreciate you coming in. I thank Commissioner Rader for setting this up. It's in, we sit on different committees. We don't have a lot of overlap, so it's good for me to hear. Last time we had Robert Suter in, the man has knowledge that it's just mind-boggling. It was fun to listen to. I have fished, but I wouldn't consider myself a fisherman. I tell my colleagues, I like to sit out Castle Rock in their little park because when somebody catches one, there's always an end zone dance that goes along with it. So I know people get excited about it. Anyway, we've taken some time. Once again, thanks for joining us today. Very much appreciate it. And we have that slideshow and I'm sure we'd be able to share that to Mike. We could work that out, or we get it to whoever wants to have it. Okay?
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
With that, we will adjourn. Thank you.